Hi, Troy.
Good morning. How are
Can
you?
you believe it's December of 2020? We've
Oh,
like, I know, that's exactly how I feel. But I'm going to share my background is one of my morning runs. I try to be intentional when I'm out for my morning runs. And the advantage of going super early is you're up and you see these amazing sunrises. So this is a sunrise, not a sunset. But I took a moment, stopped my fitness app, took a picture, and then started the app and went. So it
nice.
was a lovely morning.
Yes, Arizona sunrises and sunsets are beautiful, beautiful. So,
And I saw the Christmas star last night. Somebody was out in our street and they had the telescope set up, and so I got curious and I was like, and then I was like, oh, it's the Christmas star, and so I made it. I was intentional. I went and saw that. So
did you
trying
get
to
to see
find
the
these intentional.
rings and
I did not see their I didn't see I didn't go up to their
okay.
telescope. I
Oh,
socially distanced, but I at least saw it. I
yeah.
was like paying attention. So
That's amazing stuff.
yes.
Yes, I know 2020 has been a really hard year for a lot of people. There's been a lot of loss, wounds happening this year, and so I'm grateful that it's over. But uh, my wife keeps saying, "Well, just because it's 2021 doesn't mean it's all going to be magically over." I'm like, "Let me have my fantasy for a moment. Just let me."
I that's exactly right. I had a whole bunch of people that were going, I can't wait till this year is over. I was like, but it's going to
Right.
continue. So but
Yeah.
you know what? We've persevered. And I've shared this on other webinars and in my 12-step meetings and stuff. Like the same things that I learned early in recovery are the same things I'm leaning into. So it's
Hmm.
been a good reminder. And it like a lot of stuff it just doesn't matter so much anymore. Stuff that I'm super motivated, super busy, and all that. And it's kind of sometimes I just go, just doesn't matter. So.
Yeah.
Some of it does, and I try to make sure that I'm prioritizing, but just so yeah, like the floors went a couple extra weeks without getting washed, and it was just okay, you know.
Yeah. 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 I remember about 20 years ago, a book came out called "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff."
Yes, I remember that book.
Um, and at the same time, I was doing my internship at Gateway Allegheny County's outpatient drug and alcohol program, and the founder of that company was Abraham Tversky. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a rabbi and just a guy who was very much involved in the recovery community. And he came, you know, he was really old, but he was still very much a part of it. And he came and he talked to the men and women in our small group, and he's like, it's not all just small stuff. I mean, yes, we can try to let some stuff go, but there's significance in even the small stuff. And so, learning how to have balance and understanding how to prioritize and figuring out when what to let go of and what to hold on to is also important. So I just
Yeah.
remember his willingness to come, which I thought was amazing, and just the lessons he wanted to share. So
Well, and I think that what you're talking about too is, it's a refining process. It's like, we need to continue to look at things and turn the lens. I'm reminded that, I can sometimes be myopic and, with a monocle or even with glasses. But if I remember that, that it's a prism and if I just turn a little bit, my view of the same thing, can shift. And so I try to remember that I if I'm all head down and
mhm.
barreling ahead, I'm missing a lot of beautiful sunrises. So
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm just wondering, we have about 24 people with us right now. If there are any questions that any of you have, I'd love to hear them. There's two ways to do it. The easiest way for us to manage it is if you post it in the question and answer box. Maybe if you're listening to this on your phone or something, maybe it's harder to find that button and it's easier to do the chat. So we also have the chat screen open. So either one works, but it's easier for us to manage it if it's in the question and answer box. So I'd love to open it up to any questions that anybody has before I just jump in and start talking about whatever. But so,
Well, and I have actually referred a number of people to your previous videos because at the holiday times, I think people are bumping in up into those attachment wounds. And so your discussions about, recognizing it and then how to do something differently, I think are really valuable any time of the year, but probably even a little bit more so right now.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, some of you may be familiar with the window of tolerance while we're waiting for questions to come through. It's interesting. I think whoever designed the window of tolerance wasn't, maybe they were, I don't know. I don't actually know who developed that theory, but they weren't probably familiar with the polyvagal theory, which is something that has become fairly popular lately. And it's just the way that a neurological brain structure is designed in dealing with trauma. And the polyvagal theory was originally studied in animals. It was something that the researcher was looking at about how do animals deal with life-threatening situations, and they dealt with that. And then a social scientist said, hey, this also applies to human beings. And so they began to take a look at what that is. And what basically happens is that when we're dealing with trauma, our body is going to react in one way, and then if the trauma isn't resolved, then it will activate another part of our system of thinking. And so the window of tolerance is very similar to what that happens. And so if you think about, on the top is like the red zone up here, and then down on the bottom is like blue zone, and then in the middle is whatever your favorite color happens to be, but in the middle is what the window of tolerance is. And as we're going along day to day, things may end up happening that will smack up against one of our wounds. And if you're not familiar with those attachment wounds, that I call them: loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, uh, abuse, those wounds they get locked inside of our body at a neurological level. In Dr. Van Kirk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, he talks a lot about how these traumatic experiences really are lodged down at a cellular level. Peter Levine, in his somatic body work, talks a lot about how we can just moving our body a little bit can shift some of that and help release some of those trauma. But they're there, and we can be going through life, and something can hit one of those wounds. And if we don't recognize that that's what's happening, if we don't recognize that that pain is being triggered, we can often then have our body go into the fight or flight response, which is that zone at the top, where we begin to immediately try to figure out how are we going to get out of this. So we can become very defensive. You'll notice your hands probably get pretty tight, your eyes are going to dilate, your breathing is going to change. Some people will experience stomach problems, their body temperature is going to shift. And what's really happening in fight or flight response is all the blood that normally goes here at the prefrontal cortex, where we usually are making, well, we try to make positive choices. All that blood that's usually here helping us think clearly moves, gets shifted to our heart, our lungs, our biceps, our quads, so we can get out of there as fast as we can. And so during that time, we usually aren't thinking very clearly. That's why we will, if we're in an argument with our spouse or our significant other or kids or whoever, and we'll say something stupid, and we're like, what in the heck did I say that later on? I didn't even mean it, but it came out. Well, that's part of what's going on, is that we're actually not thinking clearly, because our neurological system, our amygdala, has sensed that there is danger and has hit the panic button, and now we've immediately gone into that fight or flight response. And so one of the things that I'll have clients do is just sit for a moment and just say, okay, when that happens, what does it feel like in your body? Can you give me examples of what fight or flight response feels like for your body. What happens to your thoughts? Do they begin to be racing? What happens to your body? What do you notice in your lungs, in your heart, in your hands? What happens there? And we just want to develop some awareness of what that is so we can recognize it a little bit more. And oftentimes we won't even notice that it was a wound that got triggered. We just recognize I went up there. If however we're up there and we don't get it resolved, then we can tank and we can go down to the very bottom, and that's shut down, and that's actually a different part of our neurological system that gets activated, and we shut down, we pull away, we become disengaged, we disassociate, we are trying really hard to get out of the situation, and oftentimes that's where the depression and those maybe even thoughts of suicide and those kind of things start to kick in. We're not trying, we are trying to get away, but it's not that fight or flight response anymore. We really are shut down, and that can be just as challenging. And so we call it the window of tolerance because we want to stay somewhere in the middle. We want to recognize when we go up, and we want to also recognize when we go down. So part of why I'm sharing that with you is that during this holiday season with a lot of loss, I mean, I've talked to several people who the normal holiday traditions are, they didn't get to happen. They didn't get to see their grandma and grandpa this year. They didn't get to see their cousins and other people just because of the whole situation. That can actually be triggering, and you may find yourself being triggered and going into fight or flight. You may find yourself diving down into just wanting to pull away and just like isolate, and those are just part of your body's response to what it feels like is a really dangerous situation. And so we just want to be mindful about it and recognize it. And there are several simple ways to be able to pull ourselves out of that. But the first part is just recognizing that, hey, that may be happening. One of my wounds might be being hit. How could I do some wound care around that? So I just thought it would be helpful to share that.
It is. And I was thinking and giving ourselves grace to understand that in this time, some of it we just have to be, it's okay, and recognize that we're going to be a little more, up and down, but
Mm-hmm.
figuring out some strategies to help us be more in that middle is a good thing. We have a question. I am early in recovery, 90 days sober yesterday. Yay.
Yay!
And just acquainted with many deep ways that I was hurt as a young child and how that relates to my sex addiction. I have spent most of my adult life avoiding experiencing any kind of rejection, so have become the rejecter.
Mm.
I am starting to become aware of how much and how often this plays out in my marriage. As a result, my behavior has been and can be so hurtful to my loving and kind husband. Any suggestions on how to start challenging my default way of being, rejecting, defensive, emotionally shut down, cold and aloof, etc., etc.? I realize this is generally a huge avoidance of intimacy, which I have no doubt will be my biggest challenge to address. Way more challenging than not acting out.
That was a
Thank you for
beautiful
sharing that. Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Oh, and first, just can I say I'm really proud of you. 90 days sober is not an easy task. So I honor that, and oof, good job. And I honor that you are starting to take a look at some of this stuff. I think Tammy and I both agree that sex addiction isn't about sex. It's really about trying to soothe the pain that we've been encountering, and oftentimes we weren't even aware of that. So when we begin this recovery journey, that's when we start to unpack, wow, these are things that are old. These are old wounds. So I love that you're starting to become aware of how that's showing up in your relationship. And I'm also hearing that there's a little bit of fear too. I'm hearing that there's that wound of rejection. That is a pretty deep wound. I've shared this experience before. I used to work in the hospital, and I was a social worker, and I was all over the hospital. But when I was up on the med surge floors, there were oftentimes people who had been there for a while, or who were there because they were having issues with diabetes or whatever, and they would have these wounds on themselves that the wound care nurses would come and take pictures of. And I know it probably grosses some people out, but I loved looking at those things. But that was like, whoa. So, but what I was really fascinated about was that the nurses would come in and they would really assess these wounds, how deep they were, what kind it was there any kind of necrotizing fasciitis going on, what was the best way to treat this, providing recommendations for the doctors to write orders, and then they would treat them. And that's really what we are doing when we begin recovery. Some of those wounds were old, like some of those wounds these people they had had them for a really long time, and they could get really bad and infected and all those kind of things, and so it would take a while. And so as we begin recovery, we start to unpack that. We start to take a look at, oh, this is a rejection wound, this is really painful, and I'm seeing that it is showing up in my marriage, in the way that I am responding with maybe my kids, my coworkers, my friends. I become guarded. I put this wall up that says, I don't want you to get near me because you might reject me. And in that process, you identified you begin rejecting them, and you don't do it because you don't want them to be in your life. You're just like, stay away. Don't touch my wound. It's really going to hurt. And so you've begun to develop this, you've begun to step into this and started to unpack it, which is the very first step. I found that it's actually helpful. And in the book, the Finding Peace workbook, the first chapter is all about the wound assessment. I found that it's helpful to maybe pick one or two of those rejection stories that you had when you were growing up and find somebody with whom you can share those. You identified that your husband is a loving and kind person. He might be willing to hear that story. I'd write it down. I'd write it down, try to tell it like you would if I were watching a movie, so we can see what's going on, see the characters, what's the texture, what's the scenario, where are we at, and just telling that story. That is a part of the healing process. And you sharing it with someone, especially someone you love, it helps them see, wow, that is such a deep wound for you, and I love you, and I'm so sad that you've had to endure that. So that's one of the things that you may want to do, is just to write that down. Sue Johnson's work in her emotionally focused couples therapy, she often talks about slicing things thinner. And so you identified that you are afraid of the intimacy, and I don't know you, I'm not sure that you're actually afraid of the intimacy as much as you're afraid of being hurt in the intimacy. um, so being able to slice that thinner and saying something to your husband like, wow, my rejection wound is pretty raw right now, and I'm noticing that I'm pulling back a little bit. In that sentence, you haven't really said much, but you have sliced it thinner. You've given a little bit of information to him about what's going on, and it gives him an opportunity to show up and say, wow, well, tell me more about that. Oh, I'm sorry that you're hurting. Part of recovery is learning how to get connection, and part of that is learning how to talk about this pain in a way that we never did before. We just would numb. We'd find ways to deny that we were actually in pain. We'd find all kinds of ways to just numb it. And now the anesthesia is wearing off, and you're starting to feel it a little bit. And it's part of why we go to 12-step meetings and why we go to the drop-in groups here, and why we do the different things we do, is so that we don't feel so alone in our woundedness. We can share with someone our wound of rejection, and they're like, oh, I have one of those too, and I don't feel so alone. So hopefully those have been some helpful suggestions. Tammy, what do you think?
I'm truly impressed that at 90 days you're able to identify this stuff. I mean, so many people, I'm sure myself included, took a lot longer to be able to start identifying those things. So kudos, yay. But I love, I love the idea of connecting and sharing. And we have drop-in groups. Troy does the Friday group, not this week, but he'll be back on New Year's. But there's a men's group tomorrow morning. And, there's a women's group. There's all these groups where people are able to connect and share those stories, so that they can get validation, get support. And I really think too, like the stories when they're caught in my head feel way bigger. So I like, the writing it out, seeing it, validating that it's true, but it's also as I share it, what's that saying? Joy shared is doubled, sorrow shared is halved. And
Mm.
so I think, in the process of sharing and getting validation of, here's where we're at, here's, you know, uh, owning it, you were wounded. Owning that is part of who you are. But the thing about recovery is we don't have to be trapped in those wounds. When you're talking about the wound stuff, I'm not quite as into the wounds as you are, but I have a history, of anyway. But some my sister, had anyway, but she would have the back
Yeah.
bandages,
Hmm.
and I was thinking of how deep the wounds are that they have to be vacuumed. They have to I don't want to gross anybody out, but they have to pull the junk out. And I was thinking that's kind of what we do in recovery is, we're giving somebody or ourselves the vacuum to help pull the junk out. But
Hmm.
then guess what? Then that junk isn't festering away in us and, continuing to systemically hurt us. I hear that you've got this amazing husband, and you want, I think, to be connected and to be intimate, not the sexual intimacy, but the being seen and known for who you are. And so if you're constantly doing the push me pull ya or just pushing away, that that ends up being a ends up being a wall that keeps everybody away. It also keeps you disconnected. So at some point we have to be willing to be enough vulnerable that we are willing to step into that space, scary as it is, say, I'm really scared. Like you said, my rejection wound is high. I need to put that out there before I share this, you know, and the thing that is always amazing to me, if the absolute worst thing happens, I've had to do this with myself before too. What's the worst thing that could happen? I could be rejected. Guess what? I'll survive that. I mean, I have survived rejection. I have support. I can reach out to other people about that. So if the worst thing happens, I'm still going to be okay. But something good could happen, and more often than not, something at least neutral, but often good, comes of it. So,
One of the things you are identifying, and if anybody else has any other questions, we'd love to have them. So please submit them. One of the things you're identifying is something that really came to my mind. I think we talked a little bit about it a couple of months ago. At the beginning of this recovery, down at the bottom, we are wounded, and we're taking a look at just how hurt we are, and we're tending to those wounds. As we begin to heal, as we begin to become aware, we start to move up a little bit in our awareness, and we start to realize how much we have wounded others. We recognize, well, wow, I have done this and I have done that. I think that the 12 steps kind of model that. Like the first half of the 12 steps are all about me and my recovery and what's going on with me. And then as we start to evolve, we start to look at, well, what's the injuries that I've done to others and how can I make amends to those as we kind of move up. And then when we really get to the top, the best word that I can describe is that there's this sense of transcendence where I am not I have those wounds. I I but I've learned how to manage them. I've learned how to do wound care. I've become very more conscientious of the choices that I make that may have an impact on other people. And so I'm at a much greater sense of peace than I was down here. And so it is an evolution as we continue to grow and transcend and come to a place of greater peace where we don't react the way that we used to. So,
and that's what I want to act, not just react. And in
mhm.
addiction, I was like, like the pinball machine, bing, 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 bing. I want to choose my actions because I'm less likely to have to go make amends I
Right.
still know how to do that. I still I've had to do that in December. So yeah, so but it's one of those where, yeah, I have more opportunity to do things in a more humane and kinder way. So
Mm.
this continues. Thank you so much for a helpful response. I had tears when you acknowledged my sobriety. We're there. We understand. I'm so appreciative of that. I do have one more question. It's related to COVID, lockdown, and triggers. Back in March, when we went into lockdown, my addiction became really out of control. Truly, you are not alone. The phones that our
Mhm.
treatment center's been full. So you are not alone, more than it ever has been. It's just been announced that the province I live in Canada is going back into lockdown Boxing Day for 28 days. Lockdown has been such a huge trigger for me. Before went into massive escape mode, I really need to prepare for some struggles this time and ensure I'm protecting my sobriety and recovery. Any suggestions? Yes. So you're here. There's a dozen of these on our site every week. So yes, connect with all the free resources. I had somebody, there's podcasts, including Troy's done one with Dr. Rob on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And I had somebody that said, anytime I even think about relapsing, I listen to a podcast. And I was like, great. There's on that same website, sexandrelationshiphealing.com, under resources, you'll see previously recorded webinars. You can't possibly watch all of them. There's that much content. I'm just saying, because all of these that are recorded, and we've been doing this for well before COVID. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. So there's content like crazy, and even if you're just going like, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes of it. We have work groups that will start again in January for Sex Addiction 101. Register, now it's a 6-week course that is structured support to go through the workbook, and just connecting with the group and focusing on that and hearing someone sharing about how they perceive, or having the facilitator talk about it. You're going to hear things that are in a different way. We've got, for men and women, we've got a couples workshop that is starting in January. So there are so many resources. So I would invite you to every day, and ideally multiple times a day, be just focusing on recovery. Um, if you haven't already done a 3-circle plan, I would invite you to do that. And I shared this on a webinar the other night, but the smallest circle is the stuff that you're giving up. The largest circle is the good stuff for us. And even in COVID, there's lots of good things. I've been intentional. I've shared that. COVID has been challenging for me. I'm very social, and like not being able to see people and give people hugs is, it's traumatic, quite frankly, for me. But I'm going like, I can be intentional, and I can reach out to people in a different way. And I've been handwriting letters to people. I mean, like seriously, so I think that there's lots of ways to get a plan. I love that you're asking. Get a plan. That's the biggest thing, and have it written down and be checking it off. What have I done today for my recovery? What am I doing to feed my recovery so that I'm not feeling like I need to feed my addiction and escape? So, Troy, what are your thoughts?
Those are all amazing ideas. I having because I'm right there with you with the whole lockdown since March. Like my business dramatically shifted from meeting in person to 99% of what I do now is on Zoom. And I got to tell you, emotionally, that is exhausting. Because our brain doesn't recognize, our brain thinks that it should be the same as if we were in person, but it's not. I'm
Yeah.
getting half of a body that's on
Hmm.
a 2-dimensional flat screen, and
Hmm.
so it's fatiguing, which doesn't help with all of this stuff. So when your province is going into shutdown, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's no way to connect. Uh, Tammy just gave some really great ideas of some of those ways to connect digitally. Who can you call? Who haven't you talked to in a long time? It phone calls. Matt Wheeler, who also does something on Fridays every other Friday, something like that.
Yes.
I'm going to steal from him. So
Yeah.
he talks about, and I've tweaked it a little bit. So I think of a deep sea diver. The the deeper you go down the ocean, the more pressure there is. Okay, so when we're looking at connection, probably the most shallow way of connecting is texting somebody, or maybe waving at somebody across the street. Like there's like no,
Yeah.
there's no really, there's no depth. But then we maybe text, and then an email goes a little bit deeper, and then doing a Marco Polo for people who use that app, whereas me talking, but I don't actually interact with people, maybe a little bit deeper. And then actually a phone call is a little bit deeper. And then going to a meeting where there's real life people in a real life, like deeper. So there's forms of depth of connection. And right now, COVID's like, well, you can't have some of those, which is frustrating. And then obviously probably the deepest is that most intimate sexual connection with your significant other, where you both are seen and heard and open with each other. Some of those have been taken away right now, but one of the things that I've found most fascinating about this whole COVID thing is it's really made us become creative in figuring out how to do some things that we haven't been able to do. And so people have been having music concerts on Zoom. People have been watching movies together in separate parts of the country or in the world, but they're on Zoom, they're watching something together. I played my son totally loves Xbox and he plays with his friends. That's how kids connect. But I played a board game on 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 Steam. I don't know anything about that. I'm still learning, but I played a board game with a friend of mine, and it was so fun because I
Oh,
love
good.
board games.
Hmm.
But we can't do that anymore. It was so fun, and we just chatted. And so there are creative ways to find connection. And when we think of addicts, we're pretty creative in figuring out the different ways that we're going to cover up and hide and all that. So channel that creative powers that we have and find some other ways to connect with people, because if it's meaningful, and I think it is, you'll pull it off, you'll figure it out.
And there won't be just one answer. Or if you try something and you go, that wasn't really it, try something else. Don't give up. Just keep trying. Or it's like do, six different things. Great. Okay, next question. I too experienced a fear of physical intimacy with my wife. I am active in 12-step recovery, SAA, but I'm wondering how the concept of inner child plays into attachment wounds. I appreciate playfulness and creativity, but am mature when needed. I guess I'm wondering how much of that hurt child in me to honor and distinguish with other concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. Okay, so for most of us, the wounds happened when we were children. And so there definitely is that inner child, that wounded child aspect of ourselves that is there. And that's why I use that concept of wounds and being able to tend to them, because you really do have a little guy inside of you who is really hurting, and he may have experienced rejection, he may have experienced abandonment, he may have experienced neglect. Any of those wounds can really affect then the fear of me showing up absolutely 100% and you seeing me and then you not accepting me, you rejecting me, you neglecting me, you abandoning me today as a grown person. And so I love that you can also be mature when you need to. I have a hard time pulling that off, man. But I think that's awesome. And that's why I use the vocabulary of the wounds, is that there are times when, man, that's really bumping up against my rejection wound. My little guy is hurting. There's a need connected to that wound. And that's why I name the wounds, because it also helps me figure out what the need is. So if it's rejection, I need acceptance. If it's neglect, I need attention. If I can figure that out, my little guy, and sometimes I do imagine like my younger self is sitting there and I will have conversations with him just like I do with the shadows. And he's like, I really am just afraid that If I reach out or something, they're not going to like me. And then I'll say something like, well, I get that. That's a really big fear. I like you. I think you're pretty freaking amazing. I love you. So let's go together and find a way to get some acceptance from somebody. Who can we call? Um, who can I reach out to? Who can I text? And so that adult part of me is taking care of that inner child part of me, and the adult part of me is the one who's going to be attending to the wounds. I'm honoring that the little guy is scared. I'm honoring that he's hurting, and then the adult part of me is going to say, "Okay, let's figure out how to do that." Hopefully, that helps answer that question. To me, that that's part of it. And then the little guy can also help me be playful. I don't have to be grown up. I can be mature, but I don't have to be grown up all the time. I can play, I can laugh, I can find joy in doing something exciting, just like making gingerbread cookies or something, and I can find joy in that. That's that younger little boy part of myself who's delighting in that. And so there's this symbiotic relationship between the two of us as I'm learning how to care for him and he's reminding me about what it's like to be a little boy and find joy in the world.
And I agree. And I think one of the things, the fear of physical intimacy with your wife, that's the conversation. I have, I really need to share this with you. I'm afraid, and here's what I'm afraid of. And maybe you write out what your fears are before you have the conversation. But intimacy is not just sex. It really is. Like it starts with communication. It may be that you just need to hold hands first, or foot massage, or something. You need to start slow, and see, I think there's lots of ways to see. Dr. Rob did a podcast with Bill and Ginger Burkaw on sexual reintegration. There may be some useful information in that for you too. The fear is always, and I keep going here. The fear is always way bigger in my head. What's the worst thing that can happen? She could reject you. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what your fear point is on that, but name it, and then share it with her. And I mean, half the time, actually more than half the time, when I actually verbalize, here's what my fear is, and here's why I'm, saying this or acting like that, people go, oh, I hear what you're saying. That isn't how I feel, or whatever, or that's not what I meant. But then we're able to have a conversation about it, or okay, here's where we both are. How do we navigate, something that's going to be useful for both of us? So. Okay, so the next question. I am currently living with my family, the source of my wounds, and I'm trying um, to figure out how to allow what they say to my. I'm currently living with my family, the source of my wounds, and I'm trying to figure out how to allow what they say to send me back to my addiction. I think that means how not to have that happen. What are some things I can do?
That's that's a beautiful question.
Yeah,
Um, and so what I'm hearing you say is that you're living in a family where your wounds are getting poked all the time. And you're trying really hard how not to like just go numb because it hurts. And so I love that. The some people say, well, just get out, but I don't know your situation, so I can't say that. That's not
right.
advice that I'm going to give you. And I honestly can
Well, and
relate.
I'm assuming that you can't get out for whatever
Right.
reasons,
I,
because
and
otherwise you probably would have. So yeah,
Right, and I can relate. Just I want you to know that I've been there, and it is a challenge. In some ways, it's a little bit of a mindset that's you're asking the question. So I think there's a part of you that's ready to explore this a little bit more, which is how can I learn? What perfect opportunity to learn how to not go act out than to be right in it and learn how to manage these wounds as they're happening. It is definitely a laboratory of learning for this, and that can be really overwhelming. We'll go to a retreats, or we'll go off to a recover treatment for two weeks or whatever, and it's really nice. because we don't have to deal with life and we don't have to deal with bills and we don't have to deal with anything. It's so sweet and nice. And then we come back to reality and then we're dealing with what we left behind. And so, in some ways, you were right there learning how to do it. You want to know what are some things you can do, though. So, first is recognizing what those wounds are, recognizing what emotion comes up for you. Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Who in your life can you turn to and talk about this? And part of the reason why I said some people will say, well, just get out, those are probably not the person that you're going to want to go talk to, because that's not what you need. You don't need someone to tell you what to do. You don't need someone to give you advice and say, well, this is what you should do. That's not particularly helpful. So, who in your life do you have that's willing to listen and say, wow, that's really hard. I'm right here with you. I'm so glad that you shared that with me. I want you to know that you matter. I know that you'll figure this out. I know that this is a stumble that you're struggling with right now, but I believe in you. Who do you have in your life who can provide some of that for you? And then learning how to turn to those on a more regular basis. And I get that COVID really does make that hard. It's maybe even hard just to go for a walk or to do something to get some alone time. That may be a challenge, but finding ways to do some self-care for you. And I talk about dailies sometimes. Dailies are taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. What's one thing you can do to take care of yourself physically today? Can you go for a walk? Can you eat better? Can you try not to eat sugar during holidays? Good luck with that. But can you decide just for this week? You just pick one thing that you're going to do this week to take care of your body. I'm going to exercise, I'm going to eat right, I'm going to try and get enough sleep, whatever that is. And just pick one and do it. Try to do it every day. What can you do emotionally to take care of yourself? Can you journal? Can you go to a recovery meeting? Can you listen? I mean, the other day I just listened to sad songs and I gave myself permission to cry, and I felt better after I did. So, what can you do to take care of yourself emotionally? What can you do to connect with your higher power in whatever way that looks like for you? What can you to spiritually do something? And some people don't believe in God, and that's fine. If you do, it might be some easy ways to connect with your higher power. If you don't believe in God, you can still connect with something greater than yourself. Is there something you can do to bless somebody's life during this holiday season? Can you donate some money to one of the food banks, or is there some way that you could provide some act of service during COVID to do something outside of yourself? And then the last is socially. Who can I connect with? I'm going to make sure I make a phone call every day. I'm going to attend a meeting every day. I'm going to write a letter to somebody that blessed my life, whatever that happens to be. But I found that if we're just doing one of those in each one of those categories, it sets a platform for a better recovery for me, because I'm taking time to do some self care for me, and that gives me a little bit more resilience than when somebody else is poking my rejection wound or whatever. I'm able to say, well, that hurts, I didn't like that. I know what I can do to take care of myself in some ways that are helpful.
And one of the things I thought of was, Kristen Snowden said recently, hurt people hurt people. And so, one of the things, if you can pull away a bit and go, what's going on for them? Why would they be acting this way? Why would they be treating me this way? It almost takes it, it depersonalizes it just a little bit and gives you a little bit more bandwidth to look at things. And I think what you were talking about, Troy, earlier, of like reaching back I've had the same thing. Oh goodness, dogs being trained, uh, phone calls happening. Oh, well, anyway, but I've had the same thing where I can reach back and and soothe my younger person, and know that the two of us can move forward. And that was hugely helpful for me. I love all those suggestions. I do think reaching out to safe people and connecting, gives us more bandwidth as well too. But just to know that, I am enough. That was part of my EMDR with my therapist. My mantra: I am enough. I am I am okay. I am worthy of being loved. I mean, like, whatever positive things I need to say to myself, so that you know, if people are treating others poorly, there's something that they're not happy with within themselves too. So even just being able to go, okay, that's them. And, that can help, I think, take it away from it's happening to me, but it doesn't have to be about me. Does that make sense? So, yeah. Okay. So, next question. I grew up in a household in which I never trusted my parents or siblings because of neglect. There was, even to this day, there was not a sense of safety and trust. This carried over into my marriage, and as a result, sex in and out of marriage was never about intimacy. That's why I always say on these, intimacy, and I don't mean sex, because those who are coming to us for treatment for sex addiction and intimacy disorders have often had lots of sex that has zero intimacy. It's about body parts, etc. Escape, numbing out, whatever. Got nothing to do with intimacy. And the challenged relationships are the marriage, the intimate connections where when someone I care about, then it's more challenging. So I 100% understand what you're saying.
So Sue Johnson talks about three levels of sex, and the first level is sealed off sex, which is what Tammy was just talking about with body parts. It's just about the orgasm. It's just about whatever can feel right, and there's not really any actual connection with the other person. And then there's solace sex, which is a little bit deeper, where I'm turning to the other person because I need comfort. I'm needing some connection with that way, and that oftentimes doesn't even have to involve orgasm. It can be involve cuddling and those kind of things. But the deepest level is synchrony sex, and where you both are in sync with each other. And not a whole lot of couples can pull that off, by the way. But one of the things that absolutely is necessary for that to be the case is safety. And so, as you are talking about, I didn't grow up in a home where I felt safe. With that, safety was never modeled for you, man. And so, how would you know what that looks like? How would you know that this is how you build safety? This is how you share your emotions. This is how you share your needs when nobody did that for you. So it's a huge learning curve now that you're as an adult and you're trying to build that. So part of that is figuring out how can I pump safety into this relationship, whatever that relationship happens to be, whether it's a friend or an intimate partner or whatever. How can I pump safety into that? What can I do to maybe tend to their wounds, because they have some, we all do, and what can I tell them that they can do to help me feel safer? And we talked a little bit about slicing it thinner, expressing that fear. I'm really afraid to be open and let you see into me, which is a form of intimacy. I'm going to let you see into me because I'm really afraid that I'm going to show you and then you're not going to care, that you're going to dismiss me, that you're going to be there but you're not. The and tying that to some of those stories from your past and sharing that with somebody, those are baby steps that you can take, but we want to pump as much safety into the relationship so that you can actually feel safe to get naked. And I don't mean physically, although that's a thing too, but to get naked emotionally, spiritually, to be able to let the other person fully see you and you feel assured that, hey, I'm here for you. I can handle it. I love you. I care about you. I don't want you to suffer. And so it is a step-by-step process of learning how to identify the wound, the emotions, and then saying, this is what I need to feel safe. How can I create that?
but we can. I mean, that's the joy of recovery is we can learn all these things that we didn't grow up with, that we weren't taught, that we weren't modeled. You know, that's what recovery teaches us is how to do life in a different and good way that we didn't, you know, and like you said, through no fault of your own, it wasn't modeled. There wasn't, you know, how can you learn something as a kid if there's no one teaching you? So but now, you know, we can learn. Okay, next question. What is your advice experience for helping addict cheating partners myself who have been who have trauma from um, bipolar or disorder parent that influence my
Borderline
behaviors?
personality.
Oh, borderline person. Okay, thank you. There's so many little
I
there's
know,
so
right?
many initials. Sorry, I got that one wrong. So let me go back. Was your advice or experience for helping addict cheating partner myself who have trauma from a borderline personality disorder parent who influenced my behaviors through life and relationships?
So I, I can only imagine what it would have been like to live with a parent who was borderline. Oftentimes, a person who's struggling with borderline personality has had severe trauma themselves, and so they've learned how to behave in a way that's very confusing for those around them because they are scared as well. And so then that bleeds into you, and the constant need to reassure them and all of that may play a role. I don't know your particular situation, but in that process, I would imagine there were deep wounds of rejection, neglect, abandonment, abuse. Maybe not physical abuse, but just like the being told, hey, if you don't love me, I'm going to kill myself. That can be really abusive. So those wounds for you, I would imagine, are pretty deep and they're painful, which makes sense then that part of what you would do then is to go find ways to numb that through acting out with different ways. I'm also hearing though that you have a partner, you care about your partner. I'm reading in between the lines, but you have a partner, you don't want to continue to cause harm to your partner, you don't want to inflict those wounds of betrayal onto your partner anymore, and yet you can find that there's a connection between how you were raised and the different experiences that you've had, and maybe seeing similar patterns in the way that you're reacting to them. So I just want to commend you, number one, for seeing that. It's really hard for a lot of people to actually see that and to own that, and we can't really change it until we can see it. And so the fact that you can see it, the fact that you're asking a question is, hey, I want to change that. So that's beautiful, and I just want to honor that. And the part about what you can do is really taking a look at how much shame is showing up for you, how much shame showed up, and we haven't talked about the shadows of shame at all today. That's fine. But how much shame was part of that experience for you growing up? The messages that you were told that you weren't enough, that you didn't measure up, that you weren't doing it right. How much do those messages of shame now infiltrate your relationship with your intimate partner? And you still wrestle with, I'm guessing, because we all do, we still wrestle with the sense of, I'm not enough. I can't measure up for you. I'm not going to be enough for you, and so you're probably going to just leave me, or you're probably going to, and that's all shame based. That's shame based thinking. And that can hijack even even the healthiest relationships. Brene Brown says that the thing that unravels connection faster than anything else is shame. And so
Mm.
part of this, I would encourage you to work with someone who can help walk through what this shame is doing to you. How can you develop some shame resilience so that you can say, hey, that's a false message, and I know what the truth is. I matter, I'm worthy of love, and so are you. And how can we then find a way to push back the shadows of shame and let light shine on just the two of us and be able to be seen that way? So I would encourage you to take a look at shame and how that is playing a role in the way you behaved, the way you acted out, and the way you're trying to show up now.
And there are so many resources. There's a number of books that are listed on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There's a number of podcasts. There's all kinds of resources that I too honor that you are asking the questions and looking at this. I hear so often from people, particularly betrayed partners. I hate to say, but that their addict is not willing to look at anything, will not do anything. So the fact that you're here, that you're asking these questions, is fantastic. I mean, that's, I love that, because this is the kind of stuff we can work with. Somebody who is asking questions and wants to move forward in a different way. So great. But there's lots of resources, and as always, if you email me, Tammy, Tami, at seekingintegrity.com, if you're looking for a qualified professional, or you're looking for, how can I, connect with something, email me. I'm happy to, send out, information that gives you specific resources. If you're looking for a qualified therapist in your area, you do need to include where you are. They all, even during COVID, they must work within their licensure laws, which means they have to work, Troy's in Arizona. He's licensed in Arizona. So, if you're in New York, he cannot work with you for therapy with that. Now there's other groups and there's workshops and things that are different. But so that's why I say, please do include it, because I get lots of, it's COVID, everybody can work with everybody. And that's not true. So
No.
yeah. Yeah. So, but great that you're here. Lots of resources. You're not alone. And like Troy said, you are worthy. We all are. We all are. I wish I could help you all internalize. We are all worthy of, you know, of, of being healthfully connected, and, owning our little person behind us and all of that kind of stuff, and realizing that those wounds are wounds, but we don't have to be defined by them. I'm on all these Facebook sobriety groups and stuff like that. And somebody was talking about, adult children who are, mad at somebody in recovery who's been working really hard, on doing things different. And they're like, you've ruined my life. And I thought, at some point, you've made your amends, you've done your thing. Now it's up for, it's up to those children to go, I can either live in that, you've ruined my life, or I have choices and I can do something different. So, okay, it's about that time. So I think I'm going to thank you, wish you a Merry Christmas, and
Thank you.
we'll see what 2021 brings. But we are resilient and we will persevere, whatever it is. And honestly, I work really hard at finding joy, just not just happy, but joy, and peace throughout. So thank you all for being here. More drop-in groups, check the schedule on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. Under events, you'll see the calendar. It's updated through the holidays. And we've got more things coming in January. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.